Hello and welcome back. Now we're here with the part 2 of the build, and well, I hate to say it, but I'm afraid that we kind of messed up, or whether I messed up a little bit. I did not in fact record the audio. Well, at least I messed around with something, and I guess I messed up the microphone inputs on my camera, and so I did not record the audio. So besides the noob mistake that we have here, I'm going to go ahead and post this video, and we're going to walk through some of the things, have a retrospective kind of talk about what actually we learned and what we did, and essentially you'll get to see some of the things. You can see some of the footage here. I'm going to go ahead and play through it. We're going to get started, and there we go. Alright, so interestingly enough, there was an awful lot of footage after I kind of reviewed this and looked through what we had here, essentially fiddling with the case for significant portions of the time. It turns out this case didn't include a lot of the stuff that I needed, like screws and all sorts of things, so it was really inconvenient for me to actually go through and well, work on this. So it's a pretty looking case, but I will tell you it's not the best one. I'll have obviously the information about what kind of case this is in the description, so you can see a little bit of what this was, but we ran into a number of different issues. So, you know, kind of playing around with everything was in here. I had some difficulty even installing some of the peripherals, like I had an extra USB kind of front loading thing. It wouldn't fit. It's got weird, I guess, cooling and all sorts of stuff. It's, like I said, beautiful case, not the most practical. So, yeah, so moving on to the next phase here, we were working through getting some of the parts installed and kind of just, you know, like I said, spending large amounts of time fiddling with this case and just getting things ready, looking at where I could actually install. I originally thought I might have some difficulty getting this back plate that you're seeing me fiddle with here. It did in fact install just fine. I had some trouble with another one from another board when I actually used this case once before. So it ended up going in quite smoothly. Now, another thing that I noticed about this particular case is although it isn't particularly bad when it comes to the fan and the position that it's got for the additional fans that you can install, but it wasn't the greatest when it came to the cooling. So even though it's a cooler master, or it's a indicating that it has high cooling, it actually doesn't have a very strong intake on the front. So it ended up being one of those things where it flat out really isn't the greatest thing for any kind of overclocking, which in this particular build was not a problem. So continuing on, as we continued to work with this case, Jasmine spent the time getting everything wired together while I was looking for parts and trying to figure out how I was going to install everything else. And like I said, you know, fiddling around with the case over and over again, which I did edit a great deal of it because I'm telling you, man, it was boring. But yeah, anyway, so essentially looking at this thing, we got things installed, and you know, everything was nicely labeled at least, and we did figure out, and Jasmine installed it into the little header that plugs into the motherboard, and we continued on. I did some instruction where, you know, we were talking through a few things. Sadly, without the audio, I have no idea what I'm pointing out here, but it's essentially the headers that we would plug into the motherboard. And we'll see. I know that there's obviously some discussion going on here, and we'll continue on as things go. Essentially, like I said, the case made this less interesting. In the future, we'll likely choose cases of, I think, that maybe rate a little bit better when it comes to cooling, or rates better for how you install things. Like in this case, this is an ATX board, so that it didn't fit the greatest when it came to all the peripherals that I would plug into. In this particular case, when I first installed my original 7600K, I'm sorry, 6700K. It wasn't an i5 Kaby Lake. I actually had trouble fitting the Evo 212 cooler in here because there just wasn't any space. So I abandoned this case and went for something else. And I essentially more cube-based case to be able to fit my cooler for the Blackintosh build, which I'll probably detail at a later date. But you know, it like I said, this particular part of the build was edited in order to try finding some way to get things installed, and I just cut out great deals of fiddling. Now, once we kind of moved on to some of the better parts of this, looking forward to, like, as you can see, I'm trying to figure out some more, like, what the heck am I gonna do with this? So yeah, you can please forgive the constant fiddling of this thing. We did actually, oh, I'm showcasing the case here. Yeah, it's great. Nice little empty box that took forever to try to get ready. Yeah. Yes. Sometimes design, form over function here. All right, so we did get to the point to where we finally could install something actually useful into here. We installed the power supply, and or Jasmine installed the power supply. I think I was getting it ready, and she went ahead and put that in the system. But you know, it, like I said, outside of the porting that is in the back and the power supply, fan, and cooling that's here, it essentially became a very difficult process for us to get anything in here. One of the things that came up in this, and hopefully this will start becoming apparently clear here once we get to that portion of it, was that well, here we are. So here's some cables. Excuse me. So the cables, the cable management in this particular case was also a bit of a challenge. It's very, very cramped, and they did this interesting design with it. So it was a cubed-like, or I guess what they call it, compartmentalized, I guess, or compartment, or I don't know what I forget what it was labeled as. But essentially, it's split in two, and you know, oh yeah, power supply, awesome, nice little EVGA power supply, which really is awesome. But yeah, so the case is split in two, and it's basically where I think they attempted to do a little bit cubed type design. When I first measured this, I measured it for the width of the case, at least the way that it was actually reported. And like I said, I had a problem with getting the 212 Evo in this box. And so it appeared on paper that it fit, but in fact it did not. And so the side effect of this is although you've got places where you can plug your drives and everything else in there, what ends up happening is you have to try to cable manage around it, and there's this area that's in the back that essentially you try to push your cables through to get it towards the mounting brackets where you would put your drives and other things. It didn't actually work very well, and essentially I had to kind of find places to put all the case of it. So it really, like I said, and I've been saying it. That was the biggest challenge with this, was just dealing with this case. I can't tell you how much. It was just ridiculous the amount of trouble we had putting this thing together with this, and it should never have been that difficult. It doesn't really show like it was difficult, but it was just a little more frustrating than I would have liked it to be, considering how wonderful it was for me to actually build Blackintosh in this beautiful case that I have. And it's Enides, I guess, is the name of the company. I probably mispronounced it, but it's a beautiful cube design that like I said, I'll have a video on it. But it really could have gone better. So really, yeah. So we're witnessing footage here, more fiddling, getting the power supply and getting everything installed in here. We did our absolute best to get this going, and you know, it probably might have been more interesting dealing with all of these issues given that maybe I could have handled my camera correctly with the microphone. So we will fix this next time. Trust me on this, because I'm sure this is just fascinating listening to me yammer on while you're watching all this exciting footage of screwdriver madness. But yeah, I'm afraid. Oh, and see, you might be looking at this peripheral that I had just put down. That was the difficult my USB header that's supposed to go in the 3.5-inch slot that you would normally put in there. It was just damn near impossible to put that in there. Absolutely impossible. The brackets that came with this thing, in order for you to actually mount anything, it was you could not contort your hands and figure out anything with a screwdriver to get that in there. It was ridiculous. So we abandoned that. So unfortunately, when I talked about it in the intro video where I had this nice little plan to put the extra USB in there, yeah, didn't work out. And so yeah, really unfortunate. But we did get through it. This machine is actually running now. So I actually, in one of the later videos you'll see next up, it does work, and we did get everything installed, and it actually performs extraordinarily well. Given that this is an i3 build, we didn't have any issues with cooling, so it really did work out in the end. But like I said, I would love for this to have gone a little smoother. And yeah, see here we're looking at some of the cables that come off the power supply. In the future, I started looking into builds like this. Maybe a fully modular power supply would be a good idea for a build like this that basically doesn't really involve a lot of peripherals. When we look at this in the future, I'm going to look into that. The problem is modular power supplies cost more. So if you're going to build a budget build, which is what this was, you aren't going to likely spend the money on. Now, you can make a case that you should spend the money on something important like a power supply. So the problem with this is I think most of the power supplies that are modular usually are much higher wattage than what you would normally really need if you were, say, building an iGPU based i3 that really isn't going to have any peripherals, with the most maybe one, maybe two drives, or an NVMe or something that you're just not going to need a lot of cooling, or a power draw, I should say. So essentially, then you're basically overbuilding for the system. That's, essentially you'd have way too much. That's another thing. I did think about this while I was pondering, and I wish to opine about the idea of overbuilding. And in fact, people that are probably much more, I guess, experienced with building PCs than I am. Essentially, I'm a software guy, so I'm sure people cringe when they see me do certain things in these videos, but it's okay. Like I said early on, this was for learning and enjoyment, and I enjoy building them. But the idea of the overbuild, so we actually put some overbuild or some headroom in this machine. Well, retrospective, we overbuilt it. It has way too much headroom, I guess. This machine is essentially built as though it could be a high-end build that we started with a low end and then upgraded. So, looking forward, I have no idea what's going on with my wife's hand motions there. Anyway, so it looks like we're getting ready to. I honestly do not know what we were talking about and why we were doing that. We're talking about putting this this board in here. Nice little, interesting little mistake that we did in fact make was that we essentially put the board in before we installed the CPU and cooler. Yeah, stupid mistake. It worked out in the end again because we went ahead and pulled out the board and got that started. So, or recovered from that. But it was no big deal. But it was, timing of installing the board could have been better. So anyway, coming up towards the end of the video, so I will stop it soon, and yeah, we'll go ahead and continue with the rest of the build in another part. So stay tuned, folks. Until then.